Good evening, everyone. My name is Noelle Lorraine Williams, and I am so pleased to welcome you all here this evening for Whose American Revolution. During this event, panelists will discuss the monumental and consequential movements for independence that happened both during and after the American Revolution and what their repercussions are today. Our speakers include Andrea Davis from the Black Loyalist Heritage Center, Juber Ayala from the Newark Public Library Hispanic Resource Center, Dr. Seema Sohi, author of Echoes of Mutiny, Race, Surveillance, and Indian Anti-colonialism in North America. This program is co-hosted by the New Jersey Historical Commission's African American History Program and RevolutionNJ. RevolutionNJ. In 2026, New Jersey, like much of the United States, will commemorate the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States of America through events, programs, and ceremonies. RevolutionNJ is New Jersey's official organization charged with planning and promoting our state's commemoration. Tonight's program is also hosted on the heels of Hispanic Heritage Month. And as we look forward to also celebrating or commemorating Native American Heritage Month in Diwali. As you all know, New Jersey has the densest population in the United States, and it actually ranks as one of the most diverse states in the country. Nearly 45% of New Jersey's 8.9 million residents are people of color. However, communities can range from highly diverse to only concentrations of one or few ethnic groups and populations in particular communities. Again, New Jersey's school system remains highly segregated by race and ethnicity. But this did not start recently. New Jersey's complex settler and colonial past began in the 17th century. The dispossession of Lenape communities in this region actually range from compromised deeds to often brutal engagements like the Pavonia Massacre in Jersey City in 1643, where close to 120 people were murdered. The first Europeans were the Dutch, who established their New Netherlands colony along the Hudson, Raritan, and Passaic rivers. In 1609, the Swedes later established a colony along the southern banks of the Delaware River. Later, as we all know, New Jersey became a British colony. Many plantation and enslavers would settle here, particularly in New Jersey, marking the long-standing relationship of both international influence on domestic concerns in culture, economics, education. This panel actually looks at the three different kinds of relationships that have existed amongst many here in New Jersey and the United States. Briefly, I will share some primary documents to illustrate what is presented to us in this opportunity to look at the nation's 250th and understand what we can do to understand more about our cultures, understand more about our different interpretations of revolution, our different interpretations of freedom, and to have deeper, stronger conversations about democracy in this state, in this country. So here, I'm just sharing a primary source. This is actually an inventory of a property owner in New Jersey, where they actually wrote the claims of what the British had stolen from their plantation, their farm, or their homestead. And so here, it's very faint, but one of the early claims on what had been stolen from them by the British was both two Negro men, and if you look over here, two Negro women. These are listed as property. So as historians and as members of this community, one of the things for us to consider is the complexity and the injustice and the deeper understanding we need to have about what liberation and independence means during this period. Over here, we get to see a document that was created called Our New Possessions, where it details our histories from the United States point of view of Cuba, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and the Philippines. Again, how do we take these primary sources and have a deeper understanding about how we interpret independence and revolution in this period? Finally, one of the things many of us are familiar with here in New Jersey are celebrations and cultural celebrations. The commemoration provides the opportunity for us to learn more about what independence means from the various communities that we all come from, that some of us still identify with, that we have and we create, home, identify with, and still celebrate, such as the India Day Parade here in New Jersey. New Jersey has one of the largest Indian populations in the United States. So these are some considerations for this conversation. One of the goals of the African American History Program here at the New Jersey Historical Commission is to illuminate the work of African American Revolutionary War soldiers, but also, again, to highlight the liberation movements of African Americans during the period, which include petitioning the legislature for freedom in the 1700s, African Americans who joined the Loyalist cause, which Andrea Davis will share with us this evening, as well as text and other journals that were created by African Americans during this period. We also have a commitment to sharing the liberation ideologies of other cultures, as we are doing for tonight's program. And we look forward to working with the various communities in New Jersey, as well as across the country, in ensuring that this commemoration is a deeper understanding of what independence can and should be. And on that note, I would like to introduce our first panelist, Dr. Seema Sohi. Dr. Seema Sohi is the Associate Professor of Ethnic Studies at the University of Colorado, Boulder. Her book, Echoes of Mutiny, Race, Surveillance, and Indian Anti-colonialism in North America, examines the radical anti-colonial politics of South Asian intellectuals and migrant workers based in North America during the early 20th century, as well as the inter-imperial efforts of the US and British states to repress them. A history of radicalism and anti-radicalism, this project also looks at the racial formations of South Asians through the lens of anti-radicalism during the early years of South Asian migration to the United States. She has also published essays and articles in the Journal of American History, Sikh Formations, and an anthology titled The Sun Never Sets: South Asian Migrants in an Age of U.S. Power. She is currently writing a history of the climate justice movement. Please welcome Dr. Sohi.
Thank you, Noelle. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction and for inviting me to be part of this really wonderful programming that you are doing and that the Rev New Jersey is doing around the commemoration of the formation of the United States. My work, as you've already mentioned, looks at South Asian migrants who came to the United States in the early 20th century and who organized an anti-colonial movement from the US to overthrow British colonialism in India. And the connection to the American Revolution in this political movement, and this is what I'll focus on in my comments today, is I was really interested in the way that these South Asian anti-colonialists used the American Revolution against British imperialism to justify and seek support for their own cause. The anti-colonial politicization and mobilization of these South Asians was far from inevitable. The vast majority, and they came in the first 2 decades of the 20th century, the vast majority came as migrant workers with little to no history of anti-colonial organizing. In fact, 50% of them were veterans of the British Indian Army. But from the moment they arrived in the United States, South Asians encountered a deep-seated tradition of anti-Asian racism and white supremacist violence. South Asians began migrating to the US in the late 19th century, but 1904 was the first notable year of migration, with the arrival of 258 South Asians. This number steadily increased over the next few years, reaching 1,072 by 1907. That was the sort of peak year of migration. By 1917, however, South Asians were legally excluded from the United States through the 1917 Immigration Act. It is worth noting that the period of South Asian migration was really only about 13 years, and the total number of South Asians here never officially exceeded 10,000. So it's worth asking, why was there such interest, such a demand to exclude South Asians when their numbers were in fact quite small? The 1917 Immigration Act, at the moment that it was passed, was the most stringent immigration law in American history up to that point. The law included numerous provisions, including the Barred Zone Act. The Barred Zone Act said all peoples living within a constructed geographic region, and this region included basically all of Asia, with the exception of the Philippines and Japan. So the Barred Zones Act said anyone living in that constructed geographic region was now forbidden from entering the United States. Now, at that point, Chinese and Japanese had already been excluded to the US. And so the law, many historians argue, was intended to restrict South Asian migration. By the time the 1917 Immigration Act was passed, US immigration, justice, and State Department officials had been collaborating with British authorities for years by monitoring South Asians, sharing intelligence about them, enacting deportation and criminal proceedings against them, and formally excluding them through restrictive immigration policy. Now, while the British impetus was clear, they viewed South Asians as actual or potential revolutionaries who were actively working to overthrow British rule in India from the United States, the motivations of the United States might seem less apparent. U.S. officials argued that South Asian anti-colonialists were dangerous, subversive, and, if left unchecked, would embolden political radicals of all types to use the United States as a site from which to launch their own revolutionary struggles. So I argue, well, actually, let me just show you some images. So most of the South Asians, as I've already mentioned, they came as migrant workers. They worked in lumber mills and they worked in the agricultural fields of California. This is a group of South Asian migrant workers in Washington State. So I argue that South Asian exclusion was not only a consequence of the anti-Asian rhetoric and politics of the time, rhetoric that claimed that South Asians, like the Chinese and Japanese who preceded them, were quote unquote invading the state, were inherently un-American, were an economic threat to white workers, right? That is the anti-Asian rhetoric and politics of the time. But I argue that US officials also racialized South Asians as a dangerous and subversive race whose organizing against British rule posed a serious threat, US officials argued, to both imperial security abroad and national security within. And they insisted that this kind of revolutionary organizing necessitated their exclusion. Now, in response to their experiences with racial violence, discrimination, and exclusion in the US, South Asians came to see themselves not only as migrants seeking economic opportunity, but as anti-colonial activists whose struggles against racism and exclusion in the US were linked to the struggles of racialized and colonized peoples across the world fighting for racial equality and political independence. In the short period of time that they were here, they fought back against racially restrictive immigration policies. They linked themselves to the legacy of the American Revolution and laid claim to America's founding documents and most lofty ideals, even as they exposed the deeply racialized aspects of American society. They were both influenced by US democratic ideals and disillusioned with the inequitable practices of American democracy. Many of these South Asians believed that the US would be a safe place for them to organize, given this country's own history of revolution. But from the moment they arrived, British officials closely monitored them with the cooperation of US immigration officials. British surveillance of South Asians in the United States was initially focused in New York City, where officials worried South Asians would forge political alliances with the Irish. But by 1908, British authorities turned their attention to the Pacific coast of North America, where the vast majority of South Asians were, and where they insisted that South Asians needed to be closely monitored because they were building a political movement that was, in the words of the director of British India's Department of Criminal Justice, quote, an integral part of the whole movement directed against our supremacy in India, end quote. So British and US officials tried to deport South Asians to India because there they would be subjected to imperial sedition laws. They decided the most effective way to do that was to try to find ways to try to make a case that South Asians were violating immigration laws. And they did this in two primary ways. The first was the likely to become a public charge clause. Now, basically, beginning in 1909, and at this point, South Asians had really only been coming to the US for 5 years, immigration officials in the US took it upon themselves to begin excluding 50% of South Asians migrating into the country using the public charge law. Basically, what they said, right, was the racial prejudice against South Asians in this country was so high, especially on the Pacific coast, that they would have difficulty gaining employment and therefore were likely to become public charges. In response, South Asians began showing up at immigration stations to challenge the public charge clause. They hired lawyers who provided affidavits from various businesses, guaranteeing that the migrants would get immediate employment. They asserted that not a single South Asian had become a public charge in the United States, and that was true. They quoted a 1910 report published by the State Labor Commissioner of California, which declared that there was, quote, a great scarcity of help, end quote, in the state of California, and that farmers were worried that they would lose thousands of dollars during harvest season because of their inability to secure necessary labor. Nonetheless, U.S. immigration officials continued to use the public charge clause as a way to extra-legally exclude 50% of incoming migrants from India until the passage of an exclusionary law by Congress. The second way that US and British officials tried to keep South Asians out of the country or deport those who were here and involved in the anti-colonial movement was by accusing them of being anarchists and using a 1903 anti-anarchy law, right, that said anarchists could be deported from this country. Now, these migrants were not anarchists, right? They insisted that the efforts of Western imperial nations to frame anti-colonial movements as anarchistic denied nationalist aspirations to colonially subjugated peoples. They emphasized the British government's long history of characterizing independence movements as anarchistic, writing that, quote, when the American colonists dumped the British tea overboard in Boston Harbor rather than pay an unjust tax, King George III wrathfully exclaimed that such anarchy in America must be suppressed, end quote. They routinely emphasized their own commitments to a political movement that would free India from economic and political subjugation and establish a democratic government. By arguing that, quote, the yearnings of the oppressed for a measure of political freedom always appear anarchistic to the oppressor, end quote, South Asian anti-colonialists challenged the ways in which US and British officials used allegations of anarchy to target anti-colonialists and to suppress their independence struggles across the world. So the point I want to make here also is that the more US officials sort of excluded and repressed these political aspirations, actually, the more this South Asian anti-colonial movement grew. Right? And by 1913, South Asian migrants in the Pacific coast organized what would become to be known as the Ghadar Party. Ghadar is translated as revolution or mutiny, and the Ghadar Party was the most well-known South Asian revolutionary anti-colonial movement to emerge in the early 20th century. It was headquartered in San Francisco. Those of you who are familiar with the city, it was in the Mission District on Valencia Street. And they had branches all over the world in cities including Vancouver, British Columbia, Panama City, Manila, Hong Kong, and many others. They organized or they published every week a newspaper called Ghadar, in which they outlined sort of their political ideas. Ghadar was immediately banned in India following the publication of its inaugural issue, and every Indian that went back to India during the First World War was searched by British officials, and oftentimes these British officials said that they were searching for copies of Ghadar because they did not want it to get circulated in India, in the villages, especially of Punjab, which is where the vast majority of these migrants came from. British authorities viewed the Ghadar Party as, in the words of Lieutenant Governor of Punjab, Michael O'Dwyer, quote, by far the most serious attempt to subvert British rule in India during the First World War, end quote. So, as I said earlier, and I don't have time necessarily, but I'm happy to talk about this in the Q&A, South Asian anti-colonialists drew many parallels between their struggle for freedom in India and the American Revolution. But in the eyes of US officials, there were few, if any, commonalities that they were willing to acknowledge between Indian and American revolutionaries. And I'll just end with saying that South Asian anti-colonialists really wanted their struggle to go down as one of the great emancipation movements in history, serving as a model and inspiration for the rest of the colonized world. While they may not have accomplished this during the period of the First World War, they left an important legacy. In their struggle to establish independence in India, they countered imperial claims that South Asians were unfit for self-government. They reckoned with the meaning, practice, unfulfilled promises, and potential of American democracy, and they advanced freedom struggles across the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sohi. Thank you for sharing that. I look forward to our question and answer and to see the legacies of this movement here in the United States and like the different ways that people may remember it in the scholarship. So I'm excited. So our next panelist will be Juber Ayala. Juber is Mr. Ayala is an archivist. Oh, I didn't realize you had that in your bio. Is an archivist at the New Jersey Hispanic Research and Information Center at the Newark Public Library. Starting in the archival field as an undergraduate intern, he quickly found a career path to apply his history and political science studies. He learned the archival basics of processing and arranging collections, as well as creating finding aids. Before starting his graduate studies, he also worked at the Center for Puerto Rican Studies as an archival assistant. He currently holds a Master of Information with a concentration in archives and preservation from Rutgers University, New Brunswick. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Ayala.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Juber Ayala. I'm an archivist at the New Jersey Hispanic Research and Information Center at the Newark Public Library. I would like to thank Noel Williams and the African American Program of the New Jersey Historical Commission for inviting me to speak today. So I'll just quickly set up my PowerPoint real quick. Hopefully this works. Okay. All right, so yeah, hopefully that's all working now. Thank you for your patience. And I had a few ideas on my segment for today's panel presentation. I would like to provide an overview of the NJHC in case you have not heard of the center before. I will also provide an overview of the Puerto Rican community in Newark and New Jersey, as well as tie in our current exhibit on the 1974 Puerto Rican rebellion that happened here in Newark, New Jersey's Branchbrook Park. In regards to the American Revolution, in a very brief summary, in just a few sentences, the colonists rebelled against the crown when multiple attempts to receive representation in parliament went ignored. Their motto was no taxation without representation, after the crown imposed multiple taxes on colonists to recoup funds after defeating France during the French and Indian War. The 1974 Newark Rebellion provides a small case study of a Latino community's attempts to gain equitable access to resources and gain political representation at the municipal level to improve conditions for city residents. Their pleas went ignored and frustrations mounted from community members. Their frustrations then reached a breaking point when a small sparks shifted civil discourse into open rebellion. So the New Jersey Hispanic Research and Information Center at the Newark Public Library addresses the informational needs of the state's diverse Hispanic communities from the newly arrived monolingual immigrant to the English-dominant scholarly research. It consists of three components: the Sala Hispanoamericana, the Hispanic Reference Collection, and the Puerto Rican Community Archives. The Sala Hispanoamericana houses the largest Spanish language book collection in the state of New Jersey. It is the service point for the Spanish dominant and monolingual patron. It is the oldest component of the HRIC since it was established in 1989, later absorbed into the HRIC when it was established in the early 2000s. The Hispanic Reference Collection is a specialized bilingual collection of reference and research materials on the Hispanic populations in New Jersey, which includes Latino oral history collections, local newspaper collections, and book collections donated by scholars, and much more. And the Puerto Rican Community Archives is a treasure trove of primary resources on the history and culture of New Jersey's Puerto Rican communities. The archive has accessioned over 55 collections and 600 cubic feet of materials. Around the time the HRIC was established in the early 2000s, Hispanics in New Jersey accounted for 13% of the population, and Puerto Ricans accounted for 4.5%. It was estimated that the Hispanic population would account for a quarter of the population by 2020, and these projections were not too far off. Based on the most recent census, Hispanics account for approximately 22%, and Puerto Ricans account for 5% of New Jersey's populations. And these figures were rounded to the nearest number. And here we have some samples of photographs from the archives of communities in Perth Amboy, Jersey City, and South Jersey as well. Through the establishment of the NJHC and its archival component, we have gathered tangible evidence that the Hispanic community has had an impact on the state's politics, agriculture, education, and history for over 100 years. In 2006, the archives officially began collecting materials, and we have quickly filled our storage spaces 4 times already. We are currently renovating space on the 3rd floor of the library to increase our current storage capacity. I assume with a bit more time, we'll definitely fill up that space real quick. I provided an overview of the center because the events of 1974 indirectly led to the establishment of the HRIC. Back in 1999, Dr. Olga Wagenheim, who's pictured here, received an invitation from the Newark Public Library's Director of Multilingual Collections, Ingrid Betancourt, to moderate a panel discussion on the 25th anniversary of the 1974 rebellion. At the moment, Ingrid Betancourt is enjoying retirement when she retired back in May, and had many great years of service here at the Newark Public Library, very instrumental with creating La Sala and later the NJHRC. So while Dr. Wagenheim tried to research the topic, she only found a folder of newspaper clippings about it. As a result of this non-existent archival experience, they began discussions about the necessity and the desire to create a safe haven for this community's history. These discussions later led to the creation of the NJHRC, and through their teamwork with Dr. Wagenheim and Ingrid Betancourt, it was definitely an act of advocacy. They were tapping into their personal and professional networks to help gather steam to the creation of the archives. Since 1999, the riots have been commemorated back in 2014 with Broomfield College's Professor Michelle Chase, who worked with students to create an exhibit on the event's 40th anniversary. This year, for the 50th anniversary, the HRIC teamed up with local organizations such as Aspira, La Casa Don Pedro, and Focus to commemorate the event, with an exhibit, a walking tour, and a family festival. So it's definitely a busy couple of weeks for us. This exhibit retells the traumatic events of the rebellion, but it also celebrates the community's excellence. Each time the community gathers to commemorate the rebellion, these events get larger and much more comprehensive. So for my next segment, I'll provide a brief overview of the rebellion. On September 1st, 1974, the Puerto Rican community was celebrating Fiestas Patronales, Festival of Patron Saints in Branchbrook Park, Newark. It was a beautiful event where families were celebrating the end of summer and having an enjoyable time. The festival attendees were soon confronted by mounted police officers who interrupted a dice or a domino game. The sources vary if it was a dice game or a domino game. The officers charged at the table and almost trampled the young girl. The attendees reacted by throwing objects at the officers, expressing years of tension and frustration. News quickly spread in the city of the clash between officers and attendees. More officers poured into the park for backup, while families desperately tried to escape the crowd. Mayor Ken Gibson sped to the park to stand between the police and the festival attendees. He promised to hear the complaints and grievances of the community. He encouraged the community to march to City Hall and to begin the process of negotiations. The march was successful. However, the negotiations unfortunately were not. As tensions continued to rise, 4 days of violence followed. 2 men were killed during the demonstrations, with many injured and arrested during this time period. And we have here some photographs of the events. Families celebrating at the park. This photograph courtesy of William Sanchez, who served as co-curator of the exhibit. And these are other photographs. A police car was set on fire in Branchbrook Park. Here the community is marching from the park to City Hall. And here's a crowd gathering in City Hall. And these are photographs courtesy of the Star Ledger and the Newark Public Library. The lingering question in the aftermath was, why did the community rebel? Why did a peaceful event suddenly turn violent? And here's a snapshot of the cover page of a local newspaper published by the city government. Puerto Rican upheaval, why? Levantamiento Boricua, ¿por qué? So even the terminology changes over time. Here, directly in 1974, it was called upheaval. Previously, it was referred to as riots, and then currently we're calling them rebellions. Here at the Newark Public Library, our exhibit on the second floor incorporates QR codes, so visitors can listen to the code, scan the code, and listen to various oral histories from the rebellion. I wanted to share testimony from Dr. Mercedes Valle, who was a witness to the events. Hopefully the audio cooperates.
So this is the youth Latin kind of fast forwarding, but were you around for the North Puerto Rican riots of 1974?
Yes, I lived here in Newark at the time of the riots, and I saw a lot of destruction. I belong to a group in Newark too, another youth Latino Puerto Rican youth group that started with Ramon Rivera, who was the founder of La Casa, which is one of the largest Latino organizations in the country now. They provide a lot of social services. He was the founder, and we organized, and we would go out and do different protests during the riots. So I saw a lot of destruction in Newark, and it was kind of like a scary time too. But people were out there.
Right. And did you, when they first occurred, did you know like why specifically, or even what specifically was going on? Like, because there was a lot going on at the time.
Right. Well, we knew that there was a lot of discrimination in Newark because Newark also was not a Latino city like it is now, or African American. Back then in Newark, it was predominantly a Jewish community. All the stores downtown Newark, Springfield Avenue, were predominantly Jewish. Everything was really whites. Puerto Ricans and African Americans had no power here. So you could see the signs that people wrote on the walls, a brother, all the different slogans. a lot of places had to close down. It became like a dead city after a while because what happened was everybody moved out. Everybody became terrified. They left the city. We stayed.
And I wanted to share one more source for today. This was published back in 1970 by Dr. Hidalgo. Here in her case study, she mentions Puerto Ricans in Newark are reaching that point where frustration can no longer be tolerated. Newark has the largest number of Puerto Ricans in the state of New Jersey. The great majority are poor, very poor. They are hopeless and desperate. Violence and confrontation are very much in the making. The word is, and I'll briefly translate, damn, what do we have to lose with a riot? My purpose is not to agitate or spread be scared news. My purpose is to disclose honestly my perception of the situation or problem, analyze some of its major causes, and propose constructive action. So just 4 years earlier, the community's lack of access to resources regarding housing, social welfare, and jobs was noted. Dr. Hidalgo pleaded that the community was frustrated, desperate, and needed help. Her words rang true when the community could no longer accept being ignored. A young girl getting injured was an indignity that they could no longer accept. After the rebellion, the Puerto Rican community in Newark was no longer invisible. As a small case study, one takeaway from the 1974 rebellion is that the community makes its grievances known years prior to a violent reaction. They even offer solutions that are mutually beneficial. While it may seem that one small incident violently sets off a community, it has been one incident too many. Another takeaway I wanted to mention is about authorship. Who is telling and interpreting the story of rebellions? I am sure that the history of the American Revolution is taught differently in England than it is in the United States. If I may add one more side note, New Jersey was the crossroads of the American Revolution. With the 250th anniversary approaching, I hope that the state gets more recognition because of the importance it played during the Revolutionary War. Unfortunately, New Jersey tends to be stared at by other states and by television writers who are always making jokes at New Jersey's expense. But I hope that we can correct this narrative, as the founding of the United States will look quite differently without New Jersey's sacrifices and contributions. And in regard to the 1974 rebellion, it has been an honor to co-curate this exhibit at the library, and we wanted to tell this story in a respectful manner. Hearing from eyewitnesses is very moving because the pain is still heard in their voices. They also share that this is a story that must be told, since many positive gains have been made in the community for the past 50 years. So that ends my portion of the presentation. I just want to share quickly some links and some contact information. But that concludes my portion.
Thank you, Mr. Ayala. I really appreciate your presentation, and Dr. Sohi's. And please, can you please, both of you, put any relevant information in the chat so our audiences can have it, and they can potentially visit the exhibition and also learn more about the archive.
All right. Thank you so much. Will do.
Thank you. It's really interesting. We'll talk during the question and answer, if we have time, about memory and who gets to represent memory. And so we have like the descendants of folks and community, and then we have academics, public historians, and it's just like how do we all work together to preserve memory? So at this juncture, I would love to present our final panelist this evening. Outside of the United States, I love how we're in New Jersey on the West Coast, and now we're in Nova Scotia. Andrea, Miss Davis was actually in New York last night at Rounce's Tavern, which has I guess they've expanded that exhibition, but they actually have an exhibition which she'll discuss, not the exhibition, but about the Birch trials, which were the trials of the African Americans who fought on the Loyalist side to claim their freedom from the British. And it's when I went to see the exhibition a couple of months ago, it was small but powerful. And I was overwhelmed with emotion to see the stories of these people who escaped and who might have fought or helped with the Loyalists to get their freedom, who then had to again go and represent themselves in front of a court. Some of them were turned back and some were accepted. So Andrea Davis is the executive director of Black Loyalist Heritage Society. Andrea Davis is a community builder, a natural leader, a strong communicator, and powerful champion for those who need to have their voices heard. She is a Nova Scotian born of Black Loyalist descent with ancestral ties and relationships within the communities of Birchtown, Shelburne, and Black communities throughout Nova Scotia. Andrea's post-secondary education includes a certification in investigation sciences and police studies, certification on education, for administrative agencies, boards, and tribunals, and a recognition of achievement and excellence in educating adults. She is working toward her certification in adult education. Andrea understands the Black Loyalist Heritage Society is committed to discover, interpret, promote, and safeguard the history of Black Loyalists and their descendants, and to the advancement of universal recognition of Black Loyalists as a nascent Canadian heritage community. Her greatest source of inspiration is from her 3 wonderful children and handsome grandson. Andrea is a descendant of the entries of the Book of Negroes. And I don't want to explode Andrea's surprise, but one of her ancestors was from New Jersey. So
That's right, and that is amazing. And it is a great surprise because as I move on in life at this late age, I'm uncovering a lot of things, and there's new information that gets provided to me on a daily basis. And so for that, I'm very grateful that I get to continue that storytelling on behalf of the Black Loyalists who arrived here in 1783, having fought for the British and been promised a lot and received very little, if nothing at all. So I don't know if my slide is there because I just got back. Oh, thank you. I did update it some from that. I mulled around with this for a while, but what I'm going to do is present this to the best of my ability and try to remember some of the updates and changes that I made to the last presentation. So before I get started, I would just like to start with the land acknowledgement for Nova Scotia. So Nova Scotia is in Mi'kmahi, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We are all treaty people from the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, which was signed with the British Crown in 1725. I'd also like to go on to the next slide to talk a bit about the land acknowledgement, the African ancestral land acknowledgement. We acknowledge those who came here as settlers, as migrants, either in this generation or in generations past, and those of us who came here involuntarily, particularly those who were brought to these lands because of the transatlantic slave trade and enslavement. We pay tribute to our ancestors of African origin and descent and thank them for their contribution towards transforming systems in ways that promote everyone's sense of belonging and safety. People of African descent have been in Nova Scotia for over 400 years, and we honor and offer gratitude to those ancestors of African descent who came to us before this land. So what I'm going to do on the next slide is, and there's no convincing here that the American Revolution, took place. We know that it did. in 1775 would have been when the American Revolution begins. And at that time, Lord Dunmore offered a proclamation of freedom to anyone enslaved or indentured to an American rebel. Later, that would be expanded to include land as well. So the next slide. So I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit, but I did update a lot of this, which I have on my phone. So I'm just going to go now to my phone and just talk a little bit about that. So if you could just go back for me, Noel, please. Thank you. So in 1775, it's also noted that when Dunmore issued this proclamation, he established martial law at the time and offered freedom to those slaves who were patriotic, as I had stated, to join the British Army. Within a month, 300 Black men had signed up for Dunmore's Royal Ethiopian Regiment, and that regiment grew to be well over 800 men. So keep it on that slide. The American Revolution had a profound effect on the institution of slavery. Dunmore's proclamation was an information document that capitalized on the institution of slavery. It was designed to influence the population. All available resources were used to maintain control of Virginia. So from my readings, I found out that this offer was for Virginians only, and it ended up expanding beyond that. It gave also opportunity and hope for Americans, African Americans, to escape slavery. When the American Revolution began, approximately 450,000 people were enslaved in 13 colonies. It is estimated that as many as 80 to 100,000 slaves throughout 13 states escaped to Britain. So just getting on this, we call the Black loyals the loyal Blacks, because they were loyal to Britain with the hope of freedom, provisions, opportunity, also to be British in some regard as well, because they felt that that was one of the ways by fighting that they thought that they could actually become part of the community. So why would Blacks chase to support British over American colonists? Well, information I have and what I've read is that African Americans fought on both sides, providing manpower to both British and to the revolutionists. Their action they believed would be best help them to throw off the shackles of slavery. And as well, most Blacks believed that victory by the British would end end of the war, would lead to the end of the war. And if you think about that, it kind of in perspective, it kind of makes you think about what really happened when the war ended and the promises were no longer provided. And then the Africans were disbanded and shipped off to Nova Scotia, parts of Nova Scotia and other places. So on the next slide, in 1783 is when the American Revolution comes to an end and the British evacuate the United States. A surprising number of slaves were manumitted, while thousands of others freed themselves by running away. The Book of Negroes document is also created as well. And this was created in New York, as I just found out when I was in New York in regards to that document. That's where the headquarters for the British actually was. Over 3,000 Black loyalists are relocated from the United States to Nova Scotia. While many are evacuated without incident, a board of inquiry is also established to adjudicate claims made against Black loyalists. So while I was in New York, I had an opportunity to speak about two women, two Black women, of course, who actually were commissioned at Francis Tavern, where I just came back from, and their cases were both heard. Information is a bit conflicting, so we decided that this is a better opportunity for us to work together between the Black loyalists and New York. But it was found out that one of the cases, which is with a Judith Jackson, her case apparently was not concluded. And in the other case of Dinah Archer, apparently she went as high as Sir Guy Carleton and asked for freedom in that respect because her certificate of freedom was stolen. So you can just imagine these strong women being commissioned before a panel of all white males, at that time British, trying to, state their case and just trying to, gain their freedom. So that's some of the impacts that we have when we talk about the American Revolution. Some other things is, let's get to my next slide here. So now I'm going to go into, So Judith Jackson here is one of the two women that I had spoke about. So as we move through the slides there, so she was born in Norfolk and she came to Nova Scotia. So before being evacuated from New York, a claim against Judith Jackson and her child is submitted by her owner. He asserts that she is not free and has been purchased by himself from his brother-in-law. Despite evidence proving her freedom, including being in the possession of a certificate, the decision in Jackson's case is postponed. So these ladies, again, after the American Revolution, are coming to be commissioned to gain their freedom. So next slide. While awaiting the decision, Elbeck attempts to capture Jackson and her child. Although Jackson escapes, she is unable to save her child, who was sent by Elbeck to Virginia. Elbeck also robs Jackson of her money, clothing, and certificate of freedom. So you can just imagine how fragile, she would have felt at that time, knowing that she was robbed of her freedom. And the next slide. Judith Jackson is ultimately able to evacuate New York aboard the ship Ranger bound for Port Mattoon, which is here in Nova Scotia. Jupiter Farmer, who Noelle was talking about from New Jersey, also came to Port Mattoon in 1783. So we're trying to think, different times, different ships, but I wonder what it would have been like after this time to come together and see each other and kind of figure out if you're family or if you're relatives or if you're just strangers and you have a similar story. She is recorded in the Book of Negroes as a stout wench, age 53. She is not recorded as having any certificate of freedom. Well, of course not, because it was stolen from her. Okay, so the next slide. Dinah Archer, also known as Archer, escapes enslavement from John Bain of Crane Island, Norfolk, Virginia in 1780. She travels with a Loyalist camp under the command of Sir George Collier and General Matthews to New York City. Next slide. During the evacuation of New York, a claim is filed against Archer. She had, in fact, been sold to another person. However, this person was never issued a bill of sale and subsequently abandoned her when he returned to England. With nowhere else to go, she returned to Bain, where she stayed until escaping to British lines. So you kind of think about, the American Revolution, what the mindset would have been after that, setting up people to continue to fail the system. So very disturbing, very sad. At her hearing, Archer is able to produce a certificate of freedom from General Birch. Although admitting to once being enslaved, she is able to satisfactorily prove her service to the British and entitlement to freedom under the proclamations made during the Revolution. Okay, I think there might be one more slide. So she evacuated New York aboard the Grand Duchess of Russia, bound again for this area, Nova Scotia, Port Roseway, which is in Shelburne, in September of 1783. In the Book of Negroes, Dinah Archer is recorded as a stout wench, one-eyed, age 42. She's also recorded as being indentured to a Mrs. Savage at the time of departure. So you can imagine those two stories, which kind of shaped parts of the Americans that came to Nova Scotia, just a story that they would have brought with them. Next slide. So arriving in Nova Scotia, many Black Loyalists encountered unfair and unequal treatment. They were given much smaller plots of land and fewer provisions. Many did not receive any provisions or any land at all. But at that time, in Shelburne and in Birchtown, the muster rolls showed a large majority of Blacks. 21 of those were recorded as free. In Birchtown, there were 200 families recorded, and in Shelburne, there were 70 families. But just to state that Birchtown, where I currently work at the Black Loyalist Heritage Society, once had the largest free Black settlement in the world outside of Africa. So you can just imagine how they would have come together and the stories that they would have told each other, however, maybe were not written down and maybe not captured. There were a few stories later that were told that were captured, but just imagine the strength we would have if we had those stories about their life. So in 1784, David George, who was a preacher, established a church in the northern division of Shelburne called Blacktown, where he baptized and preached to both blacks and whites in that community. The problem with that, and also the fact that most blacks were actually taking lower wages, it caused what we call the race riots. The first race riots in North America, the Shelburne race riots, were what happened in 1784. And a lot of the blacks at that time were pushed back to Birchtown just because of the color of their skin and just by the fact that they were actually working for a lower wage and trying to assimilate into the community after having been through what they had gone through. So you can just imagine how that would have, felt for that particular community at that time. Let me see if I have any more on that slide. So the Black Loyalists of Shelburne and Birchtown earned a living in the fishing, cutting wood, clearing land, hunting, and domestic servants and laborers. Their homes were referred to as pit houses, and that was a hole that was dug in the ground with moss covering the areas between the logs which sheltered it. They lived in those pit houses for up to 10 years. You can just imagine that 10 years is a long time. We do have a replica of the pit house on my site at the Black Loyalist Heritage Center in Birchtown. It's a replica, of course, but when you see it, it actually draws out that emotion. So it would be great if you could, and I'm offering everyone on here that is not already in Birchtown and Shelburne to actually come to the Black Loyalists and use it as part of an educational piece. Also great for historians, but I think it's important that the education be shared out with the world when it comes to this. The Black Loyalists were part of a larger wave of Loyalist immigration, which numbered up to around 30,000 people. The sudden influx of so many people put a strain on the resources of the Nova Scotia government. The Black Loyalists encountered unfair and unequal treatment. They were given smaller plots of land, like I had said, and they were also paid lower wages. They were not treated fairly, squarely. They were given a really bad experience, I would say, or a bad time trying to assimilate in that community. So I think that's it. So I think the next slide you can go to. Yeah, and so in 1791, most British promises for land were unfilled. So community members, such as this gentleman here, Thomas Peters, actually petitioned the British government to fulfill promised land, but those requests were ignored and overlooked. So around, and the next slide I think I can go to, talks a little bit more about the Exodus. So by 1791, most British promises for land were unfilled. Community members, again, as I said, petitioned to get that land. But what happened is about 1,196 people of the Nova Scotian Blacks took an offer from the Sierra Leonean Company to resettle in Sierra Leone, which is located on the Atlantic coast of West Africa. They felt they were going home, and I think that's what they had in their mind. They were tired of this cold, dark land and the ill treatment that they were giving. They left Halifax, Nova Scotia on 15 ships in January of 1792. The exodus was approximately 3 months long, with more than 60 people losing their lives on that trip, likely from illness, disease, heartbreak, and hopelessness. Arriving in Sierra Leone, Freetown was not much better. No systems had been set up. The feeling of hope and despair was once again present. This journey, as we call it today, is the exodus to Sierra Leone. Several years later, the economy and the population declined. Many Black Loyalists relocated to other parts of Nova Scotia. There were warnings to the government about this expedition. One Black leader wrote that those who went to Sierra Leone would face their utter annihilation, while white leaders, observed and felt the economic loss of this exodus. So the next slide is just a little bit about who we are as community. So here is a map of Nova Scotia, and contained on it are 48 locations, unique locations of where the Black Loyalists would have disbanded to when they had come to Nova Scotia. If you take a look, I'm always looking at number 1 and 2 because they're really familiar to me. So number 1 and 2 is Shelburne and Birchtown, which would have had the largest Black settlements and the largest number of people to come to those places where they would have landed. And so there are 52 communities to be exact. There are 4 that are missing from here. We are looking now to update this map to make it more accurate, just to reflect the fact that we've been here. We're not going anywhere. We were not meant to survive these harsh trips and harsh waters and unnavigable arms of the waterways and the ground having rocks, being hard, not able to cultivate the land. There's just so much to this story that had happened. And just to talk a little bit about the American, Revolution, it certainly did shape Nova Scotia's history for sure. And there are parts of it that it just, when you read it, it was just designed a certain way for failure for the African Americans that came here. But there are some good stories as well that are finally coming out and have been coming out about people and communities in the area. And I'm very proud of our community in Birchtown and Shelburne. I was born there. I'm not going to tell you how long ago, but it's been a minute that I was born there. And we've come together as much as we can. But what I have noticed, having gone away for a long period of time and come back, is that there's still a British presence. And I'm looking and hoping to bring some inclusivity to the community, because there's not a lot of landmarks or signs or even people that we see out in the community that reflect the Black Loyalists, or the Africans, as I should say. So those are just some things that I'm working on, to take care of. I'm so proud of the society. I'm going to talk about the Black Loyalist Heritage Society and upcoming projects that we have. But it's just to be known that there is a Black community in Nova Scotia. And I think it's important that we take this time, and even after this, if there's any feedback or any sessions after this, follow up, to just kind of ask those questions of each of us here that are presenting in terms of what we faced, and also how we would like to see things change. And with the American Revolution, it feels like a lot of that failure went on the backs of the Black Loyalists, hence the reason why we're not where we should be. And we can talk about reparations, reconciliations, but we need to make them happen for the Black community. I wouldn't say that our story is the same of the Indigenous, which suffered a lot, but we do have a similar story, a parallel story of hardships. And, we're all trying to come through this together. Our relationship with the Indigenous community in Nova Scotia is fantastic. We constantly have sessions with them, training sessions. We constantly have special events that happen. So we're very, very happy to be able to do that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm not sure my time, but I'm going to wrap it up here. So if you can go to the next slide. So this is just about the Black Loyalist Heritage Society. So in 1989, members of the Birchtown community and Shelburne community established what we called then the Shelburne County Cultural Awareness Society. This would later become the Black Loyalist Heritage Society. So the Black Loyalist Heritage Society is committed to discover, interpret, safeguard, and promote the history and heritage of the Black Loyalists and their descendants, and to the advancement of universal recognition of the Black Loyalists as nascent Canadian heritage community. So on the next slide, between 1994 and 97, the Black Loyalist Heritage Center Society acquired several properties in Birchtown to create a heritage site and museum complex. Several of our sites are actually designated as National Historic Sites. The Black Burial Ground, which I think it was in the previous slide, was designated by Parks Canada in 1996. And we also have the old schoolhouse, as you're looking here today. It was built in 1835 and was in active use until 1961. And one significant piece of information about this old school is that it actually had an integrated classroom. And so there was both Black and white students who actually went to that school. And I do have some, not here cited on this, but I do have some links to some interviews that were done in regards to the school and just the importance of having this school in the community. So the next slide is in the year 2000, the Black Loyalist Heritage Site was open to the public. Sorry, I would say that's the previous slide. But what happened in 2006, before this opened, with the it was opened actually in 2000, I apologize. The building that you see behind those gentlemen on this screen was actually destroyed by an arsonist. Artifacts and records were sadly lost. The arsonist was never brought to justice, but the amount and volume of information that was lost was well over 20 years of research. So it kind of was a setback for the community. But what ended up happening is through donations and through community involvement and just through the love and warmth of the community, we ended up opening, which should be the next slide, I'm hoping. No, it's not there. It must be the last slide. I'm a little bit off here because I had modified it a few times. There it is. Thank you. Thank you so much. So there it is now. It's a beautiful center. I would say that it did open in 2015, and to date, the center has had well over 40,000 visitors come through its door. In 2025, the Black Loyalist Heritage Center and the Society will celebrate the 10th year of it being open. So we're hoping to have a big celebration regarding that, where we get to invite as many people as we want, and hope that that everybody will come out and see that, because it is quite significant to the community. Okay, so I would just like to just kind of wrap it up just by saying in July of 2022, I was very fortunate to be hired as the executive director of the Black Loyalist Heritage Center. I took on this role with an honor to continue the storytelling with care and respect, and also to represent the community well. When I was growing up in Shelburne and Birchtown, I was never taught about the history of the Black Loyalists in school, even though it was right in my backyard. I have had the opportunity to be featured in the New York Times, the Weather Network, CBC News, Global News, Salt Wire, a trip to Washington, and most recently, a trip to France's Tavern in New York. And the work is still continuing. The connection is still being made. It is a lot of work, but I'm up for it. A quick tour of the museum in New York last night. I had an opportunity to open the Birch Trials exhibit. It is fantastic, and it is so great to see us represented in that exhibit. What I can do too is I can send you the link. And again, I do apologize. I just got off the plane, hopped in my car, and came straight home. But I do have a lot of information, including a virtual tour, an education guide, anything that I can provide to all of you. And just by closing here, Noelle, I'd just like to say that the Black Loyalist Heritage Society is on fire right now. There are a lot of projects that are on the go, and we're expressly happy with the genealogy project that we're currently working on, that is hoping to bring the community together so we can become that Mecca for Nova Scotia. We want people to come to us, and we will definitely be able to share that genealogy lineage with the rest of Nova Scotia and the world, because it's not just limited to Nova Scotia. We're making some very great connections as well along the way. We're also working on a number 2 construction battalion monument. The number 2 construction battalion is about our Black men who were not permitted to fight in the World War I, stating that it was a white man's war, so they were not permitted to fight. So we're actually working on that. And one of the biggest two biggest projects, we're working on the repatriation of the Book of Negroes. We know that book needs to be brought home from Kew, New England, to Birchtown, where it belongs. We also have a traveling exhibit launching very soon, the African Nova Scotia Seafarers Project. And one of the other biggest projects we're working on is our strategic plan, which will give us a 5-year plan and take us to limits where we've never gone before. So thank you so much. I truly feel privileged to be part of this wonderful session tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. And I would just like to direct everyone to the chat. I have some links for our next program, as well as for our mailing list. Huber has also posted some links for Newark Public Library exhibition. And feel free, Ms. Davis, to post any links. Thank you for that presentation. And so I would like to invite Huber, Mr. Ayala and Dr. Sohi to join us. I don't think we have much time for questions. There's one question. And also our executive director, Sarah Curitan, is present for the closing. And please, if anyone has any questions, I only saw one question in the Q&A. One of the things I saw earlier was a quote from King, and it was he said, "To other countries, I may go as a tourist, but to India, I come as a pilgrim." And one of the things after listening to everyone's presentation is I think of so often we use the term independence and revolution, and so much of it is about people across the world claiming their humanity and the right to live as human beings. I think that definitely undergirded all of the stories and histories that we were presented with tonight, from the young girl playing in the park, sparking the rebellion, to the stories in California establishing the center, to Ms. Davis's telling us about the legacy of people moving over generations to just create their own humane lives, and leaving places like New Jersey and Virginia. You know, I feel like these are all of our people, and the various legacies that I think are important for us to bring over the next couple of years as we engage in this conversation. So I would like to thank you all. I only saw one question in the question and answer I guess everyone is just absorbing. And I asked Sarah to answer it. And then I guess we'll close out the program. This program will be recorded and it will be distributed on YouTube, and people will continue to watch it for perpetuity, or as long as YouTube exists. So Sarah Curitan, the Executive Director of the New Jersey Historical Commission.
Oh, thank you so much, Noelle. And I want to thank our three speakers. I apologize that a commitment at the other end of the state delayed my arrival, so I got here a little bit late, but I was able to enjoy the majority of your presentations, and am absolutely overwhelmed by the information you were able to share. So thank you so much. And I did want to make a comment on that question that was in the Q&A there, and to let everyone know that part of our preparation, a crucial part, a priority for us in preparing for this 250th anniversary, is to lift up the diverse experiences of those who experienced the American Revolution. And we have been working with a variety of different organizations and communities around the state to help lift those stories up. So it's a high priority for us. We are committed to doing that in the programs we do, but we also are encouraging organizations themselves to do that kind of research and programming. And I think one of the real high points for us so far has been the the inclusive history grants that we offered 2 or 3 rounds of, which really enabled some of our, especially our smaller organizations, to do new research on communities and stories that had not previously been researched and shared. So we're very, very excited to see the results of those grants now appearing at different organizations around the state, in exhibitions and programs and publications. And we're excited to lift those up and share them as they are completed and roll out. So we will continue to do that. And my thanks again to to everyone for participating in this wonderful program this evening.
Great. My connection is doing something amazing. But again, I would like to say thank you all for participating. I didn't get to properly put this link, but the link that's also in the chat is for the South Asian American Digital Archive collective SADA. They're friends of ours, and they're actually the ones who recommended Dr. Sohi for this presentation. So we're very grateful to them as well for preserving histories of South Asian folks in New Jersey and New York and other places. So if there's anything, well, we are approaching 8 o'clock, but if there are any quick comments that folks would like to make, we'll close for the evening. I would like to encourage folks to join our mailing list and continue these conversations, because we'll definitely be doing that. So any closing comments? Don't feel forced to. Okay. Well, thank you to everyone. I will have all the links on the YouTube presentation within the next week. And thank you all for joining this conversation, and we'll see you soon. Peace.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.